Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The stale, antiseptic air of General Hospital was a scent Vaughn had come to associate with quiet desperation and hushed, life-altering conversations. It was a world away from the sun-drenched, salt-kissed atmosphere of the Port Charles docks where he spent most of his days, but his work as a private investigator had a funny way of dragging him back here, to the epicenter of so many secrets. Today's meeting was with Elizabeth Weber, a woman whose life was intricately, and often tragically, woven into the fabric of the town's most enduring legends. She had called him, her voice tight with a nervous energy he could almost feel through the phone, saying she had information pertaining to a legacy case he was working. He assumed it was about one of the many dormant files concerning the Cassidines or the Jeromes. He was profoundly, catastrophically wrong. Elizabeth met him in a quiet corner of the hospital library, far from the bustling nurses' stations and the echoing corridors. She looked older than he remembered, the weight of her years etched not in wrinkles, but in the cautious depth of her eyes. "Vaughn, thanks for coming," she said, her hands clasped tightly around a ceramic coffee mug. "Of course, Elizabeth. You said it was important." "Something about a legacy case?" he prompted, leaning against a bookshelf filled with dense medical tomes. She took a slow breath, as if steeling herself. "It's about Jason Morgan." Vaughn nodded. Jason Morgan was a ghost that still haunted Port Charles. His name was a whisper on the wind, a figure of myth and menace. Vaughn's own research into the city's power structures had led him down the rabbit hole of Morgan's life countless times. The man was a paradox, a feared enforcer with a moral code, a solitary figure who inspired fierce loyalty. His presumed death had left a void that the city was still struggling to fill. "Okay," Vaughn said, his investigator's mind already whirring through possibilities. "What about him?" "It's about his will. His estate." "There are complexities," Elizabeth began, choosing her words with the care of someone defusing a bomb. "Complications that were never part of the official record. Things that only a handful of people knew." Vaughn remained silent, letting her unravel the story at her own pace. He knew this dance. Pushing too hard could make a source clam up. Years ago, before Sunny Corinthos, before Carly, there was a girl. A young woman named Karen Wexler. Elizabeth's gaze drifted to the window, looking out at the gray sky over the city. She was sweet, troubled. She got involved with someone she shouldn't have. A.J. Quartermaine. That name got Vaughn's attention. The Quartermaines were Port Charles royalty, their wealth and influence a stark contrast to the gritty underworld Jason Morgan had inhabited. The connection was unexpected. A.J. was volatile, abusive. Karen was in a bad way. She found a protector in Jason. Back then, he was different. Still Jason, but before the hardening. He looked out for her. Elizabeth took a sip of her coffee, her hand trembling slightly. One night, things with A.J. got out of hand. Jason was there. He got Karen out. They ended up at my apartment. There was a connection between them, a moment of understanding in all that chaos. It was just one night. A single night of comfort and fear and humanity. A cold knot began to form in Vaughn's stomach. He could see the trajectory of the story now, and it was heading somewhere impossible. Karen discovered she was pregnant a few weeks later, Elizabeth continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She was terrified. She knew A.J. would assume the child was his. He would never let her go. He would use that child as a weapon. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that if he ever found out Jason was the father, he would have killed Jason, or had him killed. Jason was the father? Vaughn breathed the question, the pieces of a puzzle he never knew he was solving clicking into a terrifying picture. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes glistening. Yes. But they couldn't tell anyone. Not a soul. Jason's life was already dangerous. This secret, it was a shield. For the baby, for Karen, and for Jason. They agreed that Karen would let A.J. believe the child was his. It was the only way to ensure everyone's safety. Vaughn's mind was racing, connecting timelines, names, faces. Karen Wexler. A baby. Adopted by the Quartermaines? No, that didn't fit. Then he remembered the gossip, the old hospital scandals. Karen Wexler's child was given up for adoption. The adoptive mother was Carly, he whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Elizabeth met his gaze, her own filled with a profound sorrow. Carly. Yes. Carly adopted Karen's baby girl. She raised her as her own, with Sonny Corinthos. She named her Josslyn. Josslyn Jax. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sterile library walls closed in on him. Joss. Vibrant, fierce, outspoken Joss Jax. The girl who was a constant, infuriating, and captivating presence in his life. The girl he had come to care for in a way that was complicated and deep and entirely his own. She wasn't just Sonny Corinthos' stepdaughter. She was Jason Morgan's biological daughter. The air left his lungs in a rush. He stumbled back a step, bracing himself against the bookshelf. No. That's not possible. It's the truth, Vaughn, Elizabeth said softly. A truth buried for over 2 decades. Karen is gone. Jason is gone. I'm one of the only people left who knows. And with the ongoing probate of Jason's estate, with Michael Quartermaine acting as the executor, I thought someone should know. There are implications. For Joss's future, for her inheritance, for her identity. But Vaughn wasn't hearing the legal ramifications. All he could hear was a roaring in his ears, the sound of his entire reality collapsing. Joss was Jason's daughter. The genetic legacy of Port Charles's most notorious enforcer ran through her veins. The man whose name was synonymous with danger, with a life of violence and impossible choices, was her father. And he, Vaughn, was in love with her. The thought was so stark, so undeniable, that it almost brought him to his knees. He had been fighting it, rationalizing it, calling it anything else, but he knew. The protectiveness he felt, the deep, unsettling need to be near her, the way her smile could dismantle every defense he had so carefully constructed, it was love. A complicated, messy, potentially disastrous love. And now it was poisoned. How many people know, he managed to ask, his voice rough. Now? You, me, and the ghosts, Elizabeth said. Carly never knew. Sonny never knew. Joss certainly doesn't. As far as the world is concerned, Josslyn Jax is the daughter of Carly Benson and an anonymous sperm donor, later adopted by Sonny. This secret died with Karen and Jason. Until now. Why tell me? Vaughn demanded, a surge of anger cutting through the shock. Why burden me with this? Because you're digging, Elizabeth stated simply. You're looking into the old families, the power structures. You were bound to stumble upon inconsistencies. Karen's medical records from that time are sealed, but they exist. A stray comment from an old nurse, a forgotten diary entry. I'd rather you hear it from me, with context, than uncover it as a cold, clinical fact. Joss deserves more than that. This isn't just a piece of trivia, Vaughn. This is her life. Her life. The words echoed in the cavernous space of his shock. This revelation would detonate Joss's life. Her understanding of herself, her relationship with Carly, with Sonny, with Michael, all of it would be shattered and rearranged. She saw herself as a product of Carly's indomitable will and Sonny's fierce, if flawed, protection. To learn that her biological father was Jason Morgan, it would redefine everything. He left the hospital in a daze, the bright daylight feeling alien and intrusive. He walked without direction, his body moving on autopilot while his mind churned. Jason Morgan's daughter. The image of Joss, laughing on the deck of a boat, her brow furrowed in determination during a debate, the softness in her eyes when she looked at him, clashed violently with the mental picture he had of Jason, cold, impassive, a man of few words and decisive, often brutal, action. He found himself at the waterfront, staring out at the churning gray water of the harbor. The wind whipped at his jacket, but he didn't feel the cold. He felt haunted. For days, the knowledge lived inside him like a parasite, feeding on his every interaction with Joss. He saw her now through a new, painful lens. The stubborn set of her jaw, was that Jason's? Her fierce loyalty to those she loved, was that a thread of her father's infamous code? Her occasional, reckless impulsivity, was that the Morgan legacy? He started seeing ghosts in her features, in her mannerisms. The blue of her eyes seemed sharper, more penetrating, reminiscent of the icy gaze he'd seen in old photographs of Jason. Their relationship, once a slow, tantalizing dance of possibility, now felt like a minefield. Every touch was loaded with the weight of the secret. Every conversation felt like a lie of omission. "You've been quiet lately," Joss remarked one afternoon, finding him at the Metro Court pool. She slid into the chair beside him, her presence both a balm and a torment. "Everything okay?" He forced a smile, one that felt brittle and foreign on his face. "Just a lot of work stuff. You know how it is. Chasing down dead ends." She studied him, her head tilted. Joss was perceptive, she could read a room and him with unnerving accuracy. "It feels like more than that. You've been distant. Did I do something?" The concern in her voice was like a physical blow. "No, Joss. God, no. It's nothing you did. It's me. I've just got some things on my mind." It was the oldest, lamest excuse in the book, but it was all he had. "Okay," she said, though she clearly didn't believe him. She reached out, her hand covering his on the table. The contact sent a jolt through him, a mixture of longing and profound guilt. "You know you can talk to me, right? About anything." The irony was so thick he could taste it. "About anything. Except the one thing that is consuming me. Except the truth of who you are." "I know," he said, turning his hand over to lace his fingers with hers. Her hand was warm, alive, real. This was Joss. His Joss. Not Jason Morgan's daughter. Not a legacy. Just Joss. But he couldn't unknow the truth. The secret was a wall of glass between them, invisible to her, impenetrable to him. He started spending nights in his office, surrounded by the very files that had led him to this precipice. He pulled everything he had on Jason Morgan. He wasn't looking for answers anymore, he was looking for a reflection of Joss. He pored over crime scene photos, witness statements, and the few personal accounts of the man. He found a pattern of quiet competence, of a deep, unshakable loyalty to Sonny Corinthos and to Carly. He saw a man who had taken a bullet for Michael, who had protected the innocent even when his methods were harsh. He was trying to reconcile the monster of legend with the man who had inspired such devotion, the man who was a part of the woman he loved. It was a futile exercise. The more he learned, the more the myth of Jason Morgan fractured, revealing not a monster, but a complicated man shaped by tragedy and choice. And the more he saw those same complexities in Joss, the more the secret felt like a betrayal. She had a right to know. She had a right to her own history. But what would knowing do to her? Carly had been her mother in every way that mattered. Would this knowledge create a rift between them? Would Joss feel like her entire life had been a lie? Would she be thrust into the dangerous orbit of Jason's legacy, a target for his old enemies? The responsibility of that decision felt heavier than any burden he had ever carried. The pressure built until it found a release in the most unlikely of places, Kelly's diner. It was a late evening, and the place was nearly empty. Joss was there, picking at a plate of fries, waiting for him. He'd been avoiding her calls for 2 days, and she had finally cornered him. "Okay, Vaughn, that's it," she said, her voice firm but laced with worry the moment he sat down. "What is going on with you? This isn't just work stuff. You look like you haven't slept. You're jumping at shadows. Talk to me." He looked at her, at the determined set of her mouth, the worry in her beautiful eyes, and he felt the secret clawing its way up his throat. He couldn't hold it in anymore. The weight was crushing him. Joss, he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. He looked around the empty diner. Not here. We can't talk here. Her eyes widened. So there is something. Is it dangerous? Are you in trouble? In a way, he said, standing up and throwing a few bills on the table. Come on. Let's go to my place. It's private. The walk to his apartment was silent and tense. He could feel her anxiety radiating from her, and it only amplified his own. Once inside, he locked the door behind them, his heart hammering against his ribs. Vaughn, you're scaring me, Joss said, standing in the middle of his living room, her arms wrapped around herself. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing for a moment before stopping in front of her. He took a deep, shuddering breath. This was it. There was no going back. What I'm about to tell you, it's going to change everything, he started, his gaze locked on hers. It's a secret. A big one. About your past. About who you are. My past, she echoed, confusion knitting her brows together. What are you talking about? Your biological parents, he said, the words feeling like shards of glass. Joss. Carly is your mother. She raised you, she loves you, that will never change. But, the man you believed was your biological father, he wasn't. Joss stared at him, completely still. The sperm donor? What does that matter? I never cared about that. It wasn't a random donor, Joss, Vaughn said, his voice low and intense. It was someone known. Someone from Port Charles. From your mother's life. He could see the gears turning in her head, the list of possibilities running through her mind. He saw the moment she landed on the most logical, yet most shocking, conclusion. Her face paled. Who? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Vaughn closed his eyes for a brief second, gathering the last of his courage. When he opened them, he gave her the truth, straight and unvarnished. Your biological mother was a woman named Karen Wexler. She was young, she was in trouble. And the man who protected her, the man who was your father, was Jason Morgan. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical presence in the room, heavy and suffocating. Joss didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just stared at him as if he had started speaking in a language she didn't understand. Jason. Morgan, she finally repeated, the name sounding foreign on her lips. My father? Vaughn nodded, his throat too tight to speak. A harsh, disbelieving laugh escaped her. No. That's insane. That's not possible. Jason and my mom, they were friends. Complicated friends. But this? No. You're wrong. Where did you get this? Who told you this? Elizabeth Weber, Vaughn said quietly. She was there, Joss. She knew Karen. She knew about the night it happened. Karen was terrified of AJ Quartermain. She and Jason agreed to keep it a secret to protect you, to protect everyone. They let AJ, and then Carly, believe you were AJ's. It was the only way. He watched as the denial in her eyes began to crack, replaced by a dawning, horrifying comprehension. She stumbled back, sinking onto his sofa as if her legs could no longer support her. Jason Morgan, she whispered again, this time to herself. She looked down at her own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. All this time, my whole life. I thought. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a sudden, ferocious anger. And my mom? Carly? Does she know? No, Vaughn said quickly. Elizabeth says she never knew. No one knew. Just Karen, Jason, and Elizabeth. The anger didn't subside, it shifted, its focus narrowing onto him. And you? How long have you known? The question was an accusation. He had dreaded it. A few weeks, he admitted, the confession tasting like betrayal. A few weeks, she exploded, jumping to her feet. You've known this for weeks and you didn't tell me? You looked me in the eye, you held my hand, and you said nothing? This is my life, Vaughn. This is who I am. And you kept it from me. I was trying to protect you, he shot back, the strain of the past weeks boiling over. Do you have any idea what this means, Joss? Jason Morgan was a target. His life was violence. This isn't just a fun fact for your family tree. This could put you in danger. This will turn your entire world upside down. I was trying to figure out the right way, the right time. There is no right way, she shouted, tears of rage and hurt now streaming down her face. The right time was the second you found out. You don't get to make that decision for me. You don't get to hold my truth and decide if I'm strong enough to handle it. Who the hell do you think you are? Her words hit their mark. She was right. He had taken her agency, her right to her own history, and he had hidden it away, treating her like a child who needed to be shielded from the world. He had done exactly what Jason and Karen had done 2 decades earlier. Joss, I'm sorry, he said, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollow, aching regret. I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was scared of what it would do to you. Scared of how it would change us. Us? She let out a bitter, broken laugh. There is no us, Vaughn. Not after this. How could I ever trust you again? You looked at me and you saw a secret. You saw Jason Morgan's daughter. You didn't see me. That's not true, he pleaded, stepping toward her, but she flinched back as if he'd struck her. Don't, she said, her voice cold and final. It is true. Every time you were distant, every time you had work stuff on your mind, it was this. It was this lie between us. I felt it, I just didn't know what it was. She wiped her tears away with a furious swipe of her hand, her posture straightening with a resolve that was pure Carly, and, he now realized, pure Jason. I have to go, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I have to. I have to process this. I have to figure out what to do. Joss, please. Let me be there for you. Let me help you, he begged, the thought of her facing this alone tearing him apart. No, she said, shaking her head as she walked to the door. You lost that right when you decided to keep this from me. You need to stay away from me, Vaughn. Don't call. Don't come by. Just stay away. She opened the door and walked out, leaving him standing alone in the devastating silence of his apartment. The secret was out. The burden was lifted from his shoulders, but in its place was a far greater weight, the crushing knowledge that in trying to protect the woman he loved, he had shattered her trust and likely lost her forever. Across town, Joss walked through the streets, the cool night air doing nothing to calm the storm inside her. Jason Morgan. Her father. The pieces of her life were spinning around her, refusing to settle into a new picture. She thought of the stories she'd heard about him, the loyalty, the danger, the quiet strength. She thought of her mother, Carly, and the complicated, profound love she had for the man who was not her father. She thought of Michael, who had loved Jason as a father, never knowing they were, in fact, brothers. And she thought of Vaughn, the man she had let herself be vulnerable with, the man who had looked into her eyes and hidden the most fundamental truth of her existence. The betrayal was a fresh, open wound, but beneath it was a terrifying, exhilarating, and overwhelming new reality. She was Josslyn Jax. But she was also, irrevocably, Jason Morgan's daughter. And her life would never be the same again. The ghost that haunted Port Charles now had a name, and it was her own. Josslyn Jax had always believed her life was mapped out clearly. She was Carly Corinthos' daughter, she had grown up with the knowledge that Jax was her father, and although her family had its share of chaos, she thought at least her identity was secure. But in Port Charles, secrets rarely stay buried, and the past always has a way of clawing to the surface when least expected. For months there had been whispers, strange coincidences, and odd moments between Jason Morgan and Joss that no one could quite put their finger on. He had always been protective of her, far beyond the loyalty he had for Carly as his best friend. When Joss was in danger, Jason seemed to appear like a shadow, standing watch, as though some invisible thread tied them together. Those instincts would soon be explained in the most shocking way imaginable, when Vaughn, the ever-watchful manager of the club so many Port Charles residents frequented, uncovered information that would shake the Corinthos, Jacks, and Morgan families to their core. It started innocently enough, with Vaughn overhearing a hushed conversation between Carly and a mysterious figure in the back corner of his establishment. Vaughn had grown used to people treating his club as neutral ground, a place where secrets spilled as easily as martinis, but something about Carly's demeanor that night had unsettled him. She was nervous, her voice low and trembling, and though he could not make out every word, he heard fragments: Jason, Joss, blood test. Vaughn's instincts, sharpened from years of running a place where mobsters, cops, and desperate souls mingled, told him this wasn't something ordinary. He decided not to intervene then, but his curiosity was piqued, and he began to watch more closely. Vaughn had seen Jason Morgan walk into his club hundreds of times with that stoic expression, and he had seen Joss grow from a spirited teenager into a young woman trying to find her place. The idea that their lives were entwined in a secret so explosive seemed almost impossible, yet the pieces began to fall together. Vaughn's discovery came to a head one stormy night when he found a discarded envelope near the private office, one that bore Carly's handwriting. Inside was a copy of a lab report, DNA analysis that had been hidden for years. Vaughn froze as his eyes scanned the page, his pulse racing. The words leapt out at him with brutal clarity. The paternity results confirmed that Josslyn Jacks was not the biological child of Jasper Jacks, but of Jason Morgan. Vaughn sat back in shock, the weight of what he had uncovered nearly crushing him. In Port Charles, paternity secrets had destroyed families, ignited feuds, and rewritten destinies. But this was monumental. Jason Morgan, the enforcer who lived by loyalty and honor, had no idea that Carly's daughter was actually his flesh and blood. And Joss, who adored Jason as a family friend, had no clue that the man who always had her back wasn't just protecting Carly's child, he was protecting his own. The decision of what to do with this information gnawed at Vaughn. He was not a man who liked to meddle in the personal affairs of his patrons, but this was different. It was too big to ignore, too dangerous to sit on. He knew secrets like this had a way of detonating, destroying lives in the blast radius. Vaughn thought about Carly, about how she had carried this lie for so many years, keeping Jason in the dark. He thought about Jax, who had believed he was Joss's father and had raised her with that knowledge. And he thought about Jason, a man who had already lost so much, his family with Sam, his relationship with Danny, his bond with Jake, and how learning that he had a daughter he never knew could be both the greatest gift and the cruelest heartbreak. Vaughn's conscience weighed heavy, but he also knew the truth had a way of finding its way out, whether by accident or design. Perhaps fate had chosen him to be the vessel that delivered the bombshell. When Vaughn finally confronted Jason, the moment was tense, thick with unspoken dread. Jason had come into the club late at night, his usual silent presence commanding respect, but Vaughn could not look at him without seeing the truth burning in his mind. With steady hands, Vaughn slid the envelope across the bar and simply said, "You need to see this." Jason's blue eyes narrowed as he picked it up, his instincts already telling him this wasn't just business. As he unfolded the papers and his gaze locked onto the DNA results, Jason's face betrayed something no one ever saw in him: shock. His usually calm, emotionless mask cracked, and for the first time in years, he was visibly shaken. The words etched into the report rewrote everything he thought he knew about his life. Josslyn, Carly's daughter, wasn't just someone he cared for out of loyalty to Carly. She was his daughter. His blood. His child. Jason's world spun as the implications hit him. Every memory of Joss flashed before his eyes, the times he had protected her, comforted her, scolded her, all without knowing the truth. It all made sense now, the inexplicable pull he felt toward her, the instinct to shield her from harm at all costs. But with that revelation came a torrent of emotions: betrayal, confusion, anger, and beneath it all, a flicker of joy at the possibility that he still had a chance at fatherhood. Yet the joy was tempered by the realization that Carly had hidden this from him for years, robbing him of the chance to raise his daughter, to be part of her life in the way a father should. In the bustling town of Port Charles, secrets have a way of unraveling at the most inopportune moments, and the latest bombshell to rock General Hospital is no exception. Vaughn, a man known for his sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of truth, has just stumbled upon a revelation that threatens to upend the lives of everyone involved. The discovery that Josslyn Jax, known to all as Joss, is the biological daughter of Jason Morgan, the enigmatic and stoic enforcer, is a seismic shock that reverberates through the tight-knit community. This is not just a plot twist, it's a life-altering truth that will redefine relationships, test loyalties, and unearth long-buried emotions. What follows is a deep dive into the emotional, psychological, and social fallout of this revelation, exploring the intricate dynamics of the characters and the far-reaching consequences of this newfound truth. The revelation comes at a time when Port Charles is already teetering on the edge of chaos. Jason, a man whose life has been defined by danger and loyalty to sunny Corinthos, has always been a figure of mystery. His stoic demeanor and unyielding commitment to those he cares about have made him both a hero and a pariah in the eyes of the town's residents. Joss, on the other hand, is a vibrant young woman, full of fire and determination, raised by her mother, Carly Corinthos, and her stepfather, Jasper Jax. For years, everyone believed Jax was Joss's father, a belief that shaped her identity and her place in the world. But the truth, as it often does in Port Charles, has a way of surfacing when least expected. Vaughn's discovery begins with a seemingly innocuous moment, a misplaced file, a whispered conversation overheard in the hospital's records room. As a private investigator with a knack for uncovering secrets, Vaughn has been digging into the tangled web of Port Charles's elite for weeks, hired by an anonymous client to investigate a decades-old mystery. What he finds is a DNA test, buried deep in the hospital's archives, that confirms Joss's true paternity. The test, conducted years ago under mysterious circumstances, reveals that Jason Morgan, not Jax, is her biological father. The implications are staggering, not only for Joss and Jason but for Carly, Jax, and the entire extended family that orbits their lives. For Jason, the news is a gut punch. He's a man who has lived his life in the shadows, always prioritizing duty over personal desires. The idea that he has a daughter he's known and protected in his own way but never claimed, shakes him to his core. Jason's relationship with Carly has always been complicated, a mix of fierce loyalty, unspoken love, and shared history. They've been through countless trials together, from mob wars to personal betrayals, but this revelation adds a new layer of complexity. Carly, for her part, is blindsided. She had always believed Jax was Joss's father, a belief reinforced by years of shared memories and a carefully constructed narrative. The truth forces her to confront painful questions about her past, her choices, and the lies she may have unknowingly perpetuated. Joss, now a young adult navigating her own path, is perhaps the most affected by this revelation. She's grown up with a strong sense of identity, shaped by her mother's fierce love and Jax's steady presence. To learn that Jason, a man she's always seen as a protector but never as a father, is her biological parent is both disorienting and empowering. Joss is no stranger to drama, Port Charles breeds it, but this is personal in a way she's never experienced. Her initial reaction is one of anger and betrayal, directed not just at Carly but at the circumstances that kept this secret buried for so long. She questions her place in the world, her relationships, and even her own sense of self. Who is she if not Jax's daughter? And what does it mean to be Jason Morgan's daughter, given his dangerous lifestyle and complicated legacy?